This is where it gets real. There's a story. There was a Jew, Michael, what's your Hebrew name? Michael, you understand English, yeah? So there was a Jew, his name was Zmankimman. Zmankimman was an artist. His name was Zmankimman. He came from the Soviet Union after the war. He was an orphan. There's a story about how he was saved. His parents died because of the hunger. And him and his sister were put in an orphanage. His mother, before she died, before the war, had a cousin. And she had said to her cousin was a Tomer, her cousin was a special Jew, his name was Shmenel Batumer, and before the war started, she said to him, if anything will happen to you, I will look after your children, but if anything happens to me, you have to look after my children. So when the war was over, there was an opportunity to leave Russia. So everybody ran to what's called Lemberg. It was called Lemberg. There's another name, Lvov. It was an opportunity to leave the country. And one of the people at Lemberg was this chassid, and he has a dream. He sees his cousin, and she says to him, "We made a deal." So he went looking for his nephew and his niece. They were in an orphanage in Siberia. He found them. They had already been given up for adoption, or whatever they call it. What's the other word they use? Foster care. And he came and he claimed the two children, and he took them with him out of Russia. She was Mrs. Bart, the Bart Mishpacha, Bart, and this Zmankimman. He was very gifted. He was a gifted artist. He was very talented. So this is gossip. After midnight, the Lubavitchers speak gossip. Before midnight, we're very careful. After midnight, it's very good. That's a good answer. So he was in the DP camps, the displaced person camps. They had nothing. Everything they had was given them by others. And they came from the Joint, the Joint Distribution Committee, American Jews, very, very wealthy, and they gave unashed tzedakah. They gave so much tzedakah. I heard from the rebbe myself. The rebbe said once in Yiddish, "The Eibish der Geschicht Yidden in America is al poshet machen asachgel." Means God Almighty sent the Jewish people to America. They should simply make a lot of money. And this money saved us. It built Israel and it saved the survivors. And they gave so much tzedakah. I always tell my students, you don't like them. They literally, my father ate their bread. So I'm going to criticize the Jew because they didn't keep Shabbos. The Rebbe's mother used to call them the tzaddikim without tefillin. She used to call them the tzaddikim without tefillin. So they visited the DP camps from their joint. And this kid, Zmankimman, was sitting and doodling. He was sitting with a paper and a pencil. That's all he had. And he clearly was gifted. So one of the members of the joint said, "You've got a gift. It has to be developed. I'm going to sponsor you to go to an academy to study art." So fine, good. So he went. And he paid his way. He went to school, and he was very talented. Zmankimman is, some will tell you, the best Chabad artist. Even in some ways better than Handel. His pictures today are worth millions. When he was alive, he couldn't make a living. Now his pictures are worth millions. He was a really gifted artist. He was very gifted. He wasn't just a Balkishin, he was Balchush. His artists are very sensitive. His art tells a story. He was a very sensitive man. So he went to study art. And when you go to study art, at some point you have to make the human body. And at some point the human body is without levushim. You understand? It's the way God made it. This was a child, had not a father, not a mother, survived the Second World War, was barely alive, but he was a kid who only knew God. He was around Chassidim all the time, and he stopped going to school. When he had to make nude, he stopped going to school. So this guy from the joint said, I invested all this money and you're dropping out of school. So he said, "Sue me. Take what you can have my shirt." That was the end of that. Anyway, Zmankimman, I knew him from Crown Heights. But he moved to Israel. He had a very hard time getting married. He got married very late. His wife was much younger than him, I think. He was a very interesting man. He was a very interesting man. He was a real artist. He was deep. He was solitary. He was melancholy. He was a real artist. And he sat a whole day with a Gemara. He saw me with a Gemara. The Rebbe's verbring downstairs. He was upstairs with a Gemara. Zmankimman. So the story is told that the president of Israel, Shazar, came to Kfar Chabad for a Yutas Kislev verbringen. President Shazar, his name was Shnei Zalman. He was an atheist, but he was a Chassidic Yid, you know what I'm saying? He was a Chassidic atheist. A Chassidic atheist is a lot geschmacker than a Misnagdish atheist. A Chassidic atheist is struggling with his atheism. A Misnagdish atheist is struggling with his God, you understand? He was a Chassidic atheist. And he would come to Kfar Chabad, and they would sing the Gunim, and he became very religious for about 15 minutes. And there's videos of him sitting by the Fabrengens. He's so inspired. So, this is the old, he's talking about the 1950s. There was no money, there was nothing. Israel was a tiny, poor country, a little tiny, poor country. Shazar was the Sadik Chinuch, he was the Minister of Education. He helped Lubavitch a lot. Through him, the Rebbe pulled off a lot of miracles. Anyway, so the Fabrengen was over, they took him on a tour. It was like 12 o'clock. A tour of the Kfar. And they still had the old Arab homes, the stone structures, before they took them all down and they replaced them with modern buildings. They were living in these old stone structures. You know, you walk, you make a voice, and you hear the reverberations for like 60 seconds. So they took him one of the places. They took him to Zmankimman's gallery. He was still a boy. He was still single. He probably was 30. He was a bachelor, and he was painting. And his art is special. His art is special because he painted what he saw. So you have the old Kfar Chabad, you have the old, his pictures are they're historic. Today, they're mamish historic. They're historic. There's a guy on Kingston Avenue, Achei Art Gallery. He made a book, he published a book on Zmankimman's art and on Handel's art. If you like art, it's worth buying because you see how these men encapsulated a period of time which is gone. It was a unique moment in time, and they captured it. It's not just good pictures, it's living pictures. So Shazad is looking at his pictures, and one of the pictures is a Fabrengen, a bunch of Chassidim. One guy's drunk, and one guy's under the table, one guy's making a lot of noise, one guy's interrupting the speaker, and everybody's happy. So Shazad is going with a whole entourage of very important people. They gotta give him, the guy's paying the bills, you know, you gotta be nice to him. So everybody important, Kfar Chabad is accompanying Shazad through the village, and they come into Zmankimman's gallery, and Zmankimman is explaining to them the art. But Zmankimman was shikhet, he was drunk, he was a Fabrengen, he was already after a few drinks. So he was never a little too honest with the president of Israel, you know, you gotta behave, he wasn't behaving. So they come to one picture, and Shazar says to Zmankimman, what is this? He says, this is a Hasidic Fabrengen. So Shazar says, you mean like we just had? He says, no, it happens after you leave. It starts after you go. Then, when you go, when we have to stop the formalities, then we take off the gloves. And Shazar, he laughed. You know, there's a story. The third Lubavitch Rebbe, his name was Menachem Mendel. The Rebbe has his name. His name was the Tzemach Tzedek. In 1856, it was a Rebbe. 1856, he was a Rebbe at that point for almost 30 years. His son, the Marash, walked into him, and he was crying. Tzemach Tzedek was crying. So, the Tzemach Tzedek's leadership, he was a very powerful man. He was a very great Rebbe. But it was on Achei Temimim. It was very hard. Yeah, the Pale of Settlements was started then in Russia. The Cantonists. It was so, what the Soviets, what the Tsarists were doing to the Jews, they were squeezing him. And the Tzemach Tzedek was responsible. He was the Rebbe. He carried all of those pains. He was very successful. The Rebbe, very hard. So the Rebbe Marash walks into his father. It's 1856 on Erech, and his father is crying. Tzemach Tzedek is crying. It was a great Rebbe. It was a big Gaon. His father was crying. So he says to his father in Yiddish, Tata, was denn I exere? What new decree came down from the Tsar that's making you cry? So he tells them, there is no new decree. It's was venster. If there's no new decree, why are you crying? So he tells them, es 50 yards since ich bin gesessen bei chassidischen Verbringen. It's been 50 years since the last time I, the Tzemach Tzedek, sat at a Hasidic gathering. 50 years. So 50 years before 1856 is 1806, which was in the lifetime of the Alter Rebbe. Tzemach Tzedek was 16 years old. So the Rebbe Marash says to his father, you had a Verbringen last week. What do you mean? 50 years, you had a Verbringen last week? He says, nah. He tells him a story. When I was young, he was the Alter Rebbe's grandson. You know what the Alter Rebbe is, right? The Mechaber, the Tanya. He was Alter Rebbe's favorite. Alter Rebbe raised him. His mother passed away when he was 3 years old. The Alter Rebbe raised him. But he was one of the guys. When had a Verbringen, he told the other guy off, the other guy told him off. When he was around 16, Alter Rebbe called his wife. His name was Chaya Mushka. The Tzemach Tzedek and his wife have the same name as Ardeb and Ardeb. It's Chaya Mushka. Musya they called her. And he called his granddaughter and said to her, do me a favor, go home and bring me from your husband's Chiddush Torah, your husband's manuscripts of his scholarship, his creativity in Torah. And the Tzemach Tzedek had bookcases full of notebooks with his original thoughts. So Tzemach Tzedek, if you do the math, during his lifetime, he wrote 500,000 sheets of paper. 500,000 of Chiddush Torah. Most of it was burnt in fires. He was prolific. You have no idea how prolific he was. So she went home. She was all of 16. She also 16. They were married. They got married at bar mitzvah age. And she looked through her husband's notebooks, and she found one that looked really, really hefty. And she took it to her grandfather. She gave it to him. It was the Madura Kama of the Shadish Mitzvah. It was an earlier draft of a treatise which was now published. The Tzemach Tzedek wrote on prayer. He was 16. Alter Rebbe read it, and he was so moved that he called in three Chassidim, and he said that the Gemara says that Chut HaMeshulish Loi B'Meheri Yinotek. That means if the Torah is in your family for 3 generations, if the Torah is in one family for 3 generations, it's going to be there forever. So the Alter Rebbe says, I have 3 generations. I have myself, my son, who was his successor, the Middle Rebbe, and my grandson, who was 16. And he made a Shachayanu. No, Shachayanu is a bracha. You're not allowed to say Hashem's name in vain. To celebrate the fact that he has by him 3 generations of Torah. The Tzemach Tzedek was all 16. When this got out, when the Chassidim heard the story, the Alter Rebbe, their Rebbe, said Shachayanu on the Torah of the 16-year-old boy. Whenever he walked into a room, they would stand up to him. When there was a Chassidish Verbringen, if he walked in, everyone became quiet. Oh, the grandson of the Rebbe is here. So 50 years later, he was a great Rebbe. He was sitting in his room by himself, and he was crying. It's been 50 years since somebody was honest with me. 50 years since someone told me the truth. That's the Meiser. Anyway, you don't want to go home. After that guilt trip, it's going to be very hard to get out of here. L'chaim v'levrach should bench you and fill your heart with joy and success and blessing. L'chaim v'levrach.
Amen.
Tell
the whole story.
What's the rest of the story? What am I missing?
Come on, what happened afterwards in the same potato in the same now?
Allah stop from that sailing, Rabbi. Allah stop, Rabbi Frischman. You got to say something for your gimel. Listen. L'chaim v'levracha. L'chaim te'b'shalom. L'chaim v'levracha. 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 You know what the thing is, Azoy? To be a chassid, here's the problem. You have to work hard. And then you have to be besimcha. Beide Sachen zusammen. And Mordechai, you're listening. You have the heart of an Torah. The Torah soll reingehen in den Kopf. Should be full with Torah. Sach Torah. A chassid knows a lot of Torah. He's happy. But that's very hard. What's your name? Yeah. Azil. I forgot. Okay, l'chaim. L'chaim v'livracha. L'chaim. Ah, ya, mama.